get started with our program here. My name is Molly McCracken. I'm the director of the Manitoba office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Thank you. Just getting warmed up. We do research to back positive, progressive, and needed change. Active nationally since 1980 and in Manitoba since 1997, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is a charitable, non-profit, non-partisan research institute dedicated to advancing economic, social, and environmental justice. Just want to take a moment to recognize that we have former Premier Greg Salinger here in the room with us. Thanks so much for joining us. Like everyone in the room here, we've also had a very busy year. I hope to never again experience two elections back to back. I'm sure as many would agree with me. And hopefully we all got a little bit of extra rest last night and this morning with the daylight savings time. Our work has been highlighted on the PowerPoint that was running this morning, and it began here in Manitoba 22 years ago. Errol Black was a founding member of CCPA Manitoba, along with Jim Silver and Wayne Anthony. Today we remember Errol Black, a dedicated activist, leader, economist, and Brandon City Councillor who fought tirelessly for social justice, and when Errol passed away in 2012, a research chair was created to continue his legacy. Today is very special as we are honoring John Loxley, who contributes immensely to our community and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Among his many accomplishments, John Loxley developed alternative budgeting with the Choices Coalition in the 1990s. And we are very pleased to be doing a Manitoba alternative provincial budget to be launched this February 2020. And there's some information here at the table, APB and you. Many people in this room are involved in this alternative provincial budget, and it will show how we can create a Manitoba where everyone belongs, where the rights of labor are restored, where we advance truth and reconciliation and equity in all its forms, with gender, people with disabilities, race, religious identity, age, and any form of discrimination, and also address and fight the climate crisis. The alternative provincial budget stands on research and evidence, and we are drawing on a body of knowledge developed from an incredible partnership of academic and community organizations from the Manitoba Research Alliance. And John Loxley has been the principal investigator of the Manitoba Research Alliance for almost 2 decades now. John, thank you for your commitment to community-based, policy-oriented research that really makes an impact. And from where I stand, thank you in particular for doing this with the Manitoba office of the CCPA. Our office would not be what it is today without your leadership, so thank you. Thanks to the contributions of John and many, many others, we are a hub of research in the community to back social movements for progressive change. And all of you here today are contributing to our organization by being here today, and many contribute as researchers by submitting commentary pieces to our website and newspapers around the community, volunteering, steering committee, and allies in a collective work. We do have an exciting speaker series coming up at XQs. The next one is on November 27th with Shelley Marshall speaking about drugs, jail, or public health. There's some incredible other opportunities, so this notice is out on the table and it's also on our social media. We could not do our work without the countless trade unions who donate to our office, the amazing individuals who contribute financially, and to the foundations who fund our research. Thank you in particular to all the table sponsors, the groups who sponsored the table here today. There's a list in your program. Thank you to Unifor for sponsoring the AV today. And thank you to QP for videotaping our day today. It will be available on the CCPA YouTube channel. And we need your support because, of course, there's much more work to be done. We must continue to do what is morally just for those left behind by capitalism, for future generations, and to honor the legacy of those who have come before us. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Jim Stanford, who has also made an incredible contribution to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives as a board member for many years and as a research associate. Thank you so much, Jim, for your contributions. I will read Jim's bio. Jim Stanford is an economist and director of the Centre for Future Work based at the Australia Institute. The Australia Institute is Australia's most influential progressive think tank. The Centre for Future Work focuses on issues of work, labour markets, income, economic development, technology, inequality, skills, and more. The Centre was founded in May 2016, and Jim is its inaugural director. Jim relocated to Sydney, Australia from Toronto, and he actually flew here from Australia to be with us here today, so thanks for going halfway across the world, where he is one of Canada's best-known economic commentators. He served for over 20 years as economist and director of policy with Unifor, Canada's largest private sector trade union, formerly the Canadian Auto Workers. He is also the Harold Innes Industry Professor in Economics at McMaster University and an honorary professor in the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney. Jim received his PhDs in economics from the New School for Social Research in New York. Jim is the author of Economics for Everyone, a short guide to the economics of capitalism, which is available for sale at the Fernwood table outside the doors. Stanford has written or edited or co-edited 6 other books and dozens of articles and reports in both peer-reviewed and popular outlets, and maintains an active presence on social media. He is recognized for his ability to communicate economic concepts in an accessible and humorous manner. Please help me welcome Jim Stanford.
Thank you very much, Molly. It's wonderful, wonderful to be here and see such a group, a large group and an interconnected group and a hopeful group. We need all the hope we can get these days, and hope is in abundance in this room. I can feel it. I do want to start by paying tribute to Errol Black and his family. Errol, of course, was a very important progressive voice in the economics profession. When I was starting out as an economics student, undergraduate at the University of Calgary, of all places. Now, just imagine what that was like for, a young socialist going into economics, hoping to change the world, and confronting the University of Calgary economics department with, believe it or not, Stephen Harper in his master's office down the hall from me. Okay, and at any rate, I read Errol's work and I was inspired by it, and it convinced me that there was other ways to go in economics. So Errol was important to me as well as to so many others on that side of the profession. And I have to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge my dear friend and mentor, Professor John Loxley. John is such an important person in our whole progressive community, not just here in Winnipeg, but in Canada and around the world. He's a role model of what Gramsci called an organic intellectual, someone who uses their immense academic capacity, yes, to advance knowledge and publish excellent scientific research, but always in a way that's integrally and permanently embedded in real-world movements for social change and social justice. I would use up all my time here today trying to list all the areas that John's contributed so immensely to: development economics and debt relief, community economic development, indigenous economics, critical macroeconomic and financial analysis, and of course his role struggling for years to help build a very important critical mass of progressive scholarship in economics here at the University of Manitoba, keeping the barbarians at the gates most of the time. The barbarians are always at the gates, it seems, but it's still vital. It's absolutely thriving, and Canada's most important progressive outpost for economic scholarship. And of course, John's contributions to the alternative budgeting movement, starting with choices, exporting the revolution to the rest of Canada through the alternative federal budget, and then globally. Just last week in Australia, I was meeting with some progressive groups about how do we fight back against the austerity that's coming from this newly re-elected right-wing government. And I pitched the idea of, well, why don't we do an alternative budget just to show how we can afford all these things and it still adds up at the bottom. And they were agog. They were like thrilled. They said, what a great idea. Who thought of that? You know? And I'm like, hashtag duh. It's John Loxley and choices and the whole movement in Canada. So, John, you have inspired me personally. You've motivated me. You've changed my life along with thousands and thousands of others struggling for progressive change around the world. So, John, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have to give a shout out to my union, Unifor at the back. Hello, Unifor folks. Hello. And all the other trade unionists in the room. And pay tribute to all of you for the role that you play supporting CCPA, a needed voice of sanity in Manitoba and everywhere else in Canada. And also thank you for coming to hear an economist on Sunday morning, of all things. Sounds like a Stephen King novel, doesn't it? I had an extra hour's sleep. I thought it would be a good day. But then came the economist. Economist, someone who's good with numbers but didn't have the personality to become an accountant. So, in that case, some of you are saying maybe I should have gone to church after all today. I don't know. Okay, so as Molly said, I've just come from Australia. I actually flew over yesterday, or Straya, as they call it down there. They have a way with words in Straya. And of course, there's lots of similarities with what is often called Canada down there, Canada. It was actually the right-wing Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who called us Canada at an international forum. Lots of similarities, of course. We both have vast spaces facing hostile climatic conditions. The only difference is Australia is plus 50 and Canada is minus 50. Apart from that, we've each developed our own modes of transportation to deal with these climatic conditions. Both countries, unfortunately, still addicted to the pursuit of digging shit out of the ground and selling it to other countries. Okay, that's the economic development model in both countries, unfortunately, that we need to wean ourselves off quickly. In Australia's case, it's iron ore and coal and LNG. And in Canada's case, it's bitumen. We each have our deadly predators, of course. Canada's tend to be rather large, you know, grizzlies, cougars, wolves, etc. Australia's are a bit smaller, okay? But don't let that fool you. That fucker will still kill you before you can say Australia. That's a little black widow spider. And of course, both countries have a proclivity for producing right-wing dickhead politicians. So here's two of the worst. Nice shirts, boys. That's all I can say. Stephen Harper and Tony Abbott, the guy I mentioned before, but of course they have a capacity to reproduce themselves. Tony Abbott is gone. He lost his own seat in the last election, but this grumpy character, Scott Morrison, has replaced him, and using the same old tactics of fear and division and a few bribes of phony tax cuts, he somehow managed to get back into office this year. And last week, his big pronouncement was that they were going to pass laws banning climate activists from disrupting traffic, having protests, and get this, ban them from campaigning for boycotts against companies that have bad environmental records. And this idea that a secondary boycott of a company is somehow interfering with their right to truck and trade is just incredible. And it just shows you how the attacks on all kinds of expression and democratic rights and campaigning rights are really ramping up around the world. And we have to be on guard against them. We have our own new generation, of course. Luckily, this guy with his very unique way of shaking hands, and you wonder why he didn't connect with Canadians. But thankfully, But anyways, they'll replace him with someone more photogenic and more competent as a politician, and why we have to be on guard, and why the work we do through the CCPA is so important. So Center for Future Work is the think tank that I've been running in Australia. There's our website. There's my Twitter handle and the Center's Twitter handle. I invite you to join the conversation today. When I went down to start this up, I had an idea of calling it something more descriptive. I had originally thought of the Center to Ruthlessly Expose the Iniquities of Capitalism. But my director didn't think that had quite the same ring to it, so we called it the Center for Future Work, and it's actually a brilliant name. I can't tell you how much free media coverage we get, because some journalist Googled future of work, came straight to us. And the future of work is an enormously important topic. It's attracted a lot of interest and attention and concern around the world, so that's what I'm going to talk about today, what's changed and what hasn't changed. Sometimes progressives make an important contribution just by saying, hold on, people. Yeah, I know there's a lot of hype about, whatever the latest shiny thing that came along was, but there are some tried and true ways of looking at the world that actually are still valuable. So the stereotype that we confront is that work is disappearing, humans are being replaced by robots, jobs are being replaced by gigs. And this is the dangerous part. It's all driven by technology, is the argument that we hear over and over again. There's a technological force that's somehow exogenous, it's somehow irresistible, it's ubiquitous, and there's nothing you can do about it. And this attempt to describe what's happening in the world as driven by some anonymous, uncontrollable force is an attempt to disempower us. Because the fact is, if it's technology, how can you stop technology? I mean, you can certainly redirect technology, and we should remember that the directions that technology unfolds in is because smart people were paid to go away and solve certain problems. So the people who are paying them and the problems they're being asked to solve are not neutral or predetermined. They're in fact reflective of the interests and power structures of the world that we live in. So technology is not neutral, but we certainly can't stop technology, and we don't want to stop technology. So if we assume that everything that's happening is because of technology, in a way we're giving up, and that's exactly what they want us to do. So I'm going to try and challenge that stereotypical view about the disappearance of work as we know it with five specific insights. First insight: work is not going to disappear. Work can't disappear. The reality is that humans' capacity to work, broadly defined as productive human activity, the use of our brains and our brawn. Okay, our brawn is our capacity to perform physical labor. Our brains are our capacity to solve problems and analyze and conceptualize. Productive human work, and work is a four-letter word, okay, it is a four-letter word, especially on Monday morning, okay, is in fact the only force that adds value to the raw materials and other gifts that we harvest from nature. So we started with the planet. We started with a place to live and work, air to breathe, water to drink, and resources that we harvest. Hopefully, very quickly, we learn how to harvest those resources sustainably. But we're still going to be using those resources as a starting point. And from that point on, every bit of value added to those gifts of nature, transforming them into the goods and services that we need to survive and thrive as human beings, came from human labor, one way or another. Now, the fact that some production processes are automated, okay, in the sense that we use more machines and less direct physical labor in that, hardly means that work has disappeared. It means that work has changed. And just like chimpanzees who can use a hollow stick to get termites out of a mound, or birds who can build a nest, or beavers who build a dam, human beings learned that our work is more effective and efficient and productive when we use tools. And automation is simply another form of tool, but it still ultimately depends on human labor, or nothing is going to happen. So there are some familiar reasons why work is not going to disappear, and why these very dystopian forecasts of a world without work are not really believable. One of them is that there's lots of work associated with the new technology in the first place. Somebody has to design and engineer the robot, somebody has to manufacture it, somebody has to install it, somebody has to maintain it. Moreover, there's new jobs that are created every time a new technology is rolled out, because we suddenly notice that we can use that technology to do other stuff that we either didn't know of or or couldn't do until the new technology was there. That's why the people who program digital games and apps on our smartphones, you know, those very useful apps that allow us to waste an entire day without actually accomplishing anything useful, okay, those are jobs that didn't exist before because we couldn't conceive of them or we couldn't do them. Then, of course, there is always the fact that, in theory, the whole economy should be managed in a way to keep people at work, using the conventional tools of monetary and fiscal policy, and these days unconventional tools when necessary to keep people working. There's unfamiliar reasons why work is not disappearing. First of all, this whole alleged shift towards automation and mechanization and artificial intelligence and so on requires the economy, and in a capitalist economy, that means private business, to be investing in capital equipment and technology in order to use those things. And the reality is, the business class in Canada and most other industrial countries, for the last decade at least, has been too lazy to get off their asses and actually do that investment. So business investment is very weak. We're actually seeing less investment, not more. There's also a structural shift that could be a very positive one if we make the most of it, where more of our work is going into actual direct services that we perform for other human beings, including caring services like child care, aged care, disability services, and so on. And these are jobs that, thankfully, so far, you do them much better when it's an actual human being delivering those services instead of a robot. So in Canada and other countries, there's a shift towards more and more work being located in those sectors. Finally, in the labor market that we live in, that thrives on the desperation and poverty of working people so that employers can take advantage of that, there's an incredible capacity to create some of the most demeaning, degrading, low-paid, low-productivity jobs available. So anytime you go out and see somebody being paid minimum wage, if that, to stand there and hold a sign, okay, which is surely one of the most easy jobs in the whole economy to automate, you just put the sign on a stick and stick it there. That's proof positive, first of all, that the minimum wage is far too low, right? If any company can hire someone to do something that's so unproductive. But secondly, that there's this pool of desperate people who will take a job at minimum wage to stand there and hold a sign. I like to think of three different levels of work, if I can theorize a little bit. Work that I've defined in the general sense as productive human capacity, using our brains and brawn to produce useful goods and services. Then there's a special form of work, a subcategory of work that we call employment, or wage labor. That's where you're doing the work for someone else. They tell you what to do. They own the value that you produce, and they pay you some kind of compensation, some kind of wage or salary in return for that. Most of the work in the formal part of our economy in Canada is employment. And then you think of a job just being a particular way of organizing employment. How that paid employment work is organized and chopped up into bits and managed and compensated and structured. So the reality is, work itself cannot disappear. It's the only force that adds value to the goods, to the gifts of nature that we harvest from the environment. In our economy, employment is not disappearing. In fact, it is more important than ever. A larger share of people in our society work in some kind of capacity for someone else. Even the famous Uber driver, okay, I hate to break it to them, but they are not actually their own independent business, even though the company likes to portray them that way so that they can get around basic labor laws. The reality is the Uber driver is working for Uber. Uber has just discovered a very clever and exploitive way to package that work and compensate them, while avoiding inconvenient barriers like the minimum wage and pensions and health and safety requirements. It's jobs that are changing, generally for the worse, simply because we've given employers too much power and too much freedom to restructure work in ways that suit their interests instead of ours. My second insight is to just challenge this whole idea that we live in a world of accelerating technological change in the first place. And again, I think that that is vastly overstated. For sure, there are some incredible things that technology can accomplish, usually in a sort of laboratory setting. Some of the forms of automation, artificial intelligence, and so on. This is the one that scared the hell out of me, I have to tell you. This is the robot that was programmed to assemble an IKEA chair. Okay, did anybody see that on YouTube? And I'll tell you this, friends, after my spouse saw this video, she started looking at me differently, okay? Like, What do I need that guy for anyways? But the reality is, even though these things can do incredible things, particularly in a laboratory setting, the hype about automation does not remotely match the actual reality that we see around us in the economy. There's no doubt that some jobs and some occupations and some industries are being transformed thoroughly by technological change. There's no doubt that most of the economy is not. And in fact, recorded labor productivity growth across the whole economy is slowing down, not speeding up. And if in fact workers were being replaced by machines in a big way, that could not be the case. And capital investment by business in new technology is also declining, not growing. So this is a graph that shows the share of GDP in Canada that's invested by the private business sector in machinery, equipment, structures, robots, all other forms of capital equipment. And if in fact robots were taking over, this would be growing, not shrinking. In fact, it's declined by at least a third since the turn of the century. 2001, by the way, is when Paul Martin introduced all the big cuts to corporate income taxes. Okay, Judy remembers this debate and fought hard against it. And the argument was, we'll create an incentive for business to invest and we'll all get the trickle-down benefits. And it's the same argument that's been heard ad nauseum around the world. And around the world, it's failed. Same as Trump's corporate tax cut has failed, business investment in America has declined, not grown. So we have a situation here where the business profits are higher than ever. The taxes are more favorable than ever, so they get to keep a larger share of those profits, but they're investing less than ever. So now I don't want to make it sound like I'm being critical of business in any regard. I don't want to sound like I'm pointing fingers. You know, I'm not saying they're lazy sods who are refusing to do their job. Perhaps a better way to put it is, they've become locked in an unfortunate cycle of dependency. Okay, so the business class has received these easy tax cuts, easy handouts, easy subsidies, easy profits, especially in the banking and resource sectors, and have forgot what it's like to work for a living. So I suggest a workfare program for business. Okay, you don't get any of these incentives unless you actually get off your ass and go and do your job. Okay, so that would be my approach. And productivity growth is not spectacular at all. In fact, it's been absolutely ho-hum, slower than it was even in the 1990s, let alone in the sort of post-war golden age of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when investment was booming and unemployment was very low and trade unions were growing and taxes were rising. Those were times when investment was strong and productivity was growing quickly, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I'm starting to sound like an oldies goldies disc jockey, perhaps, you know. The greatest economic policies of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all right here. And it's been all shit ever since, hasn't it? Except for the music. The music was best in the 80s. In the 80s, of course. The music's always best when you went to college, right? So this is where, you know, some forecasts say half of all jobs are going to be replaced by machines. That's where productivity would have to get to if that happened. And there's where productivity actually is. So at this pace, it's going to take many, many decades before that happens. And potentially, there's benefit from having jobs replaced by machines as long as we do it right. You know, as long as we make sure that the interests of working people are protected as it goes forward, and we take the benefits of that in the form of both higher real wages and more time off to enjoy life. So I think portraying technological change as the boogeyman is economically and politically a dead end. My third insight, this whole infatuation with gigs and digital platforms and on-demand work that takes up so much airspace, absolutely missing the point. And what's more, this aura of shiny newness and innovativeness that surrounds this practice, not at all deserved. If we look at what constitutes, in a concrete way, a modern gig job, you can see some common features. First of all, it's on an on-demand basis. You don't have a regular hours, a regular job. You're hired to do something when it's needed. You're on call. Secondly, you're not paid by the hour or the week. You're paid according to each piece of work that you perform. So that's called piecework compensation. Third, the worker has to assume the responsibility for providing the capital equipment, the tools, and often the place of work. So an Uber driver has to provide the car and pay for it and take all the responsibility. The Deliveroo person provides the bike, and so on. Fourth, there's some kind of triangulated relationship at play between the person who's actually performing the productive labor, the worker, and I do consider this a form of employment in the economic sense. They're working for the digital platform in return for compensation. Then there's a person who uses the service at the end. It could be a consumer or it could be another business. And then there's someone who's positioned themselves comfortably right in the middle to take a slice of the profits, to take the cream on that relationship. Finally, of course, because it's a gig job and this is 2019, there's some kind of gimmicky technology involved in this, some kind of digital system for organizing this work, usually through an app on smartphones. I say, so what? You know, the boss will always find some way to communicate with you, and if they're communicating with you on an app or email or text message, rather than just calling you up and telling you to get into work, that does not look like a fundamental change in social relationships to me, okay? So let's look at this. So on the issue of homework, working in your own place of home and providing your own tools. This is a picture from the old putting out system, which was an early form of manufacturing in Europe in the 1700s and 1800s, where workers, usually women, bought their own machines, looms and other machines. They would go to their boss, the merchant, collect the raw materials, take those raw materials home, add value, transform them into clothes or shoes or small household items, and then take it back to the boss and get paid for it, and then hope that they get another gig. Okay, that was how manufacturing started to emerge in Europe. And in a way, it's absolutely gig work. This is a gig economy right here, okay? All that we need is we need to give her a smartphone, okay? We need to give her a smartphone so she can get her orders and her compensation that way. Honestly, I think we're onto something here. I think this putting out idea could be quite profitable. I'm going to start a new company and issue shares. I'm going to call it puttingout.com. Puttingout.com. No, actually, now that I think of it, that might not work. Okay. Puttingout.com. Piecework, of course, all the trade unionists in the room know piecework is as old as the hills. The boss will always try to trick you into being your own boss by paying you by the job. And it has limits. It has benefits for the boss, but it has limits as well. It doesn't work very well when you work in teams or when quality is as important as quantity. But at any rate, there's nothing new at all about piecework. Working on call, that's when you're needed, is also as old as capitalism. For centuries, the workers have gone down to the docks or gone down to the mine or gone to any other workplace in hopes that they'll get a day's work if needed. And the lucky ones do, and the unlucky ones don't. Labor hire, of course, is hundreds of years old. The gangmaster system in 16th and 17th century England was people who positioned themselves between the people doing the work and the businesses, the farms that used it at the end, and creamed off the surplus in between. So nothing new at all about all those things. What we are seeing is the erosion of a system of organizing employment, of converting employment into jobs that was better for workers, but in retrospect was a kind of temporary aberration, if you like, in the long history of capitalism, which was the emergence of what we now call the standard employment relationship after World War II, where jobs were kind of organized on a permanent, more secure basis, and workers were able to get more of the benefits. It wasn't perfect, of course, and not everyone had one of those standard better jobs. It was always unequal, including by gender and race, but we were able to win something for a while. Now that standard employment relationship is being rolled back and replaced with a more precarious and insecure pattern of employment. And it isn't technology alone that drives this. This is a crucial thing. Yes, technology is built into those digital phones and apps and websites, but it also requires other things to work. One of them is chronic underutilization in the labor market. You have to have a pool of unemployed, underemployed, desperate people. Otherwise, who the hell else would say, I'll go out on Friday night and hang around to see if anybody calls me to order them fast food for $10. Okay, that sort of a job. I hate to break it to all this nonsense that's what young people want. They don't want a sort of regular job. No, they want the flexibility that comes with working gigs. Bullshit, if I can use the technical term. Bullshit is a technical term in economics. It means hypothesis unsubstantiated by empirical verification. Okay, just to define the terms as we go. young people would definitely prefer more regularity, more predictability, and better wages. It also requires regulators to turn a blind eye. Most gig workers do not make minimum wage, and if regulators had any gumption, they could crack down on that. And it also reflects people's willingness to continue working that way. Their expectations have been driven down by a generation of neoliberalism and hardship. Another aspect of all of this talk about technology and all the hype about Brave New World is this idea that all you have to do is learn STEM skills and you'll be all right. You know, and the economy is really being held back by a lack of skills. Wrong. Canadian workers are more skilled than they have ever been, especially young people, the young generation, by far, and among the best educated in the world. In fact, Canada has the highest rate of post-secondary attainment among the total labor force than any other industrial country. Yet millions of workers don't even use the skills that they have. So how can we say that the problem is that people aren't skilled enough? The problem is that we haven't created jobs and invested so that people can use the skills that they invested in. And you hear always from employers complaints about the lack of skilled workers, or the skills crisis, the inability to recruit skilled workers. And again, this is nonsense. The biggest vacancies in those job vacancy surveys are in the fast food and hospitality and retail sector. And the reason they've got vacancies all the time is because they pay shit wages, right? And people leave. Shit wages is a technical term in economics, okay? It refers to compensation inadequate to meet the necessities of life, okay? So, in fact, we don't have a generic skills shortage. Yes, we should keep investing in skills, but we also have to be committing to create the jobs that people can use those skills in. And we should absolutely push back against the employer complaints that they can't recruit people. The best way to recruit more people is to offer them better conditions and better wages, and suddenly you'll find it. The last insight, and I kind of hinted at this at the beginning, we have to stop seeing this as a technologically deterministic process. Work is a social activity, okay? We always work with other people. There's no such thing as a self-made billionaire, okay? No matter how much propaganda you hear otherwise, every billionaire had to depend on other people, their workers, their suppliers, their consumers, the infrastructure, and so on. And it is those changes in social relationships among human beings that explain what happens, and in particular, changes in the relative balance of power between those individuals that explains why society goes one way rather than another way. We do not yet live in the world of Terminator, okay? I've just dated myself by even using this analogy. Although I noticed there's a new Terminator movie out, right? I gotta see it, okay? The machines are not running the humans. Humans are running the machines. The question is, which humans are running the machines, and to what end are they being put to work? And if we take control of those machines and tell them to work for good instead of evil, we can actually build a better society and a better economy. The changing balance of power, which has allowed employers today to use technology, they've always used technology, but to use modern technology in ways that enrich themselves and disempower and exploit the rest of us is the problem. And we have had a generation of neoliberalism that deliberately creates and recreates unemployment and underemployment in order to keep people hungry and desperate and disciplined. We've had governments that step back from their role that we want them to play, which is standing up for us and protecting us and equalizing things, and instead government is making matters worse. And we've had a restructuring of Social Security so that the ability of people to live without jumping into that very exploitive, insecure labor market has been restrained. I think that we should take in a way, a more realistic view of the changes in the world of work and the future of work, and in a way, a view that puts us at the center of it, rather than passive victims of a technological process that's beyond our control somehow. There will be lots of work to do in the future. There's no shortage of things for us to do, starting with caring for each other, caring for our communities, and caring for the environment. That is work, and it requires productive human effort in order to achieve it. We can organize that work into good jobs as well. but only if we give power to the people who are actually doing those jobs. That means getting back to something like a full employment situation where everyone has the right to a job and can find one. Regulatory structures that lift up standards instead of turning a blind eye to exploitation. In the realm of technology, there's lots that workers can demand in terms of the right to know about technology, the right to participate in decisions about how technology is implemented in workplaces, the right to negotiate over technological change, and yes, we'll continue to make investments in capital and technology and skills and people. My conclusion is I believe that work, broadly defined as productive human activity, is still the absolute engine of the progress of our society. It is what makes the economy go round. Workers are the ones that add value and produce and drive progress, not the stock market, not derivatives traders, okay, not bean counters, but people who are actually doing productive work. And for the vast majority of society, by my estimates, about 85% of Canadians depend on the income from employment as the main source of their sustenance through their life cycle. Okay, it doesn't mean 85% of us are employed at any one point in time, but over our lives, 85% of us depend on employment as our way of being, as our way of supporting ourselves. Now, the other side tries to slice us and dice us, right? They try to say, no, you're a worker, but you're a professional, you know, or you're in the private sector, no, you're in the public sector. You work in a factory, but you work in an office. You're not the same at all. Nonsense. We're all using our brains and brawn to produce goods and services that are essential for our economy. Someone else is paying us and telling us what to do. The minute we start thinking like 85% is the minute we take charge and start turning this ship in a different direction. And I do believe politically that struggles around work are still going to be the centerpiece of our overall struggle for social change and social justice. Not in any way to diminish all of the other struggles that we have to undertake as well for equality, for sustainability, and others. But I do believe that because work is so central to the economy, so central to our lives, it's our relationship to work that ultimately will be the pillar of our effort to change society. And in that regard, trade unions, as the representatives of working people, have a very special responsibility and a special role, and why I'm so thrilled there's so many unionists supporting the work of the CCPA. The good news is, if work is still essential and work is what drives our economy, we're better able than ever to work. The reality is there's more of us, and we've got more skills, and we've got more tools and knowledge to make our work productive. So every time somebody in government, Pallister or someone else says, I'm sorry, we just can't afford that anymore, you have to tighten your belts, okay? Say why? Why on earth do we have to tighten our belts? There's more of us, we can all work, and we can work more efficiently. Anything we could afford before, we can afford now and more, because we've provided the real economic foundation for those things. There's never a shortage of money, okay? Don't believe that nonsense for a minute. The private credit banking system creates billions of dollars out of thin air every single day of the week, okay? And now, in the wake of the global financial crisis and quantitative easing and everything else, the Pandora's box has been opened, and people now understand, you're right, money is created out of thin air. So why don't we start creating it out of thin air for stuff that we want to do, okay? That's not a bad idea. And it's not a problem of running up against limits from nature, in the sense that, yes, we have to respect nature and we have to understand the central role of nature in our economy, but there's going to be swaths of work required to protect the environment, to develop green energy and public transit and home insulation and all the other tasks that go into it. We just have to find ways to put people to work doing that. Our ultimate problem is not an economic one. Our ultimate problem is a political one, okay? That we've been divided, that the powers that be are using their tools to reinforce their power, and we have to organize ourselves to win it back. And I absolutely believe we're going to do that. I'm optimistic every morning. I take 2 of these trade union Prozac pills. That also keeps me optimistic in the morning with my orange juice. But you guys make me optimistic because you're the ones who are going to change the world, and you're doing it right here. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It was well worth the price bringing you in from Australia for that. I'm Lynn Fernandez, and I hold the Errol Black Chair in Labour Studies, and I want to welcome everybody here today and thank Jim again for that wonderful presentation and for reminding us why we miss him so much, and I know I miss him, and I've talked to others who've mentioned that they miss him, particularly on the national, and they wish that you would come back, and they really miss your calm and in-command way of bringing the discussion back to what really matters, and I think that was amply demonstrated in your presentation today.
Closer to the mic.
Okay. I have to stand closer to the mic and read my papers with my progressive glasses at the same time. I'll see if I can do it. Really also too, Jim, what people miss so much is the way you can unpack that dominant message around things like minimum wage and employment and future of work, as you did today, and really shine a light on the wrong-headedness of so much of what's wrong with mainstream economics. And you've demonstrated again that you give us economics for everyone, and the world would certainly be in a much better place if it listened to economists like you. There's another economist I know who gives regular people hope, and that's John Loxley. Jim, you worked with John on the first alternative budgets, as did others in this room, like Shirley Lord and Shauna McKinnon and Greg Salinger. And as has been mentioned already, John is the one who actually came up with the idea of doing alternative budgets with that grassroots organization called Choices. It's a project that lives on in most CCPA offices, and including here in Manitoba. And there's a lot of people here in this room, I think, who worked on those first budgets in the 90s. And also we have some students here today who are helping us with the 2020 alternative provincial budget. So the tradition is really living on. The appeal of the exercise, and I think this is where it's fundamentally a John thing, is in how it demonstrates budgets, democratizes budgets, and shows how governments can both be fiscally and socially responsible. In fact, John demonstrates all the time that in order to be fiscally responsible, they have to be socially responsible. And 20 years later, alternative budgets are still effective, an effective means to inspire, challenge, and educate the public and policymakers. There's many of us here today who know firsthand of John's work, whether it be at university, the Union Hall, in government, or the community. And I have been lucky enough to have had John as a professor, and now as a colleague in the Manitoba Research Alliance, and as the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues. Any ability I have to do my job as the Errol Black Chair is owed in large part to what I learned from John and the other heterodox economists that I studied with at the University of Manitoba, including Fletcher and Ardisher, Robert and Ian, all of whom hold you in such high regard. John has been so important in keeping heterodox economic thought alive at the U of M, making it one of the few departments, I think, in the Western world where students can actually still get exposed to a variety of economic thought. John had a profound effect on the way I do my research, how I see my role as the Errol Black Chair, and my appreciation of what community means. The work we do at CCPA is greatly enhanced through John's willingness to run the Manitoba Research Alliance's federal government SHIRK grants through our offices. And having the MRA located in the community rather than on a university campus gives us much more credibility with the people that we actually do research with. And having a project director with John's long history working with local urban Indigenous groups and grassroots organizations like Choices also gives us street cred. John's contacts are many and his experience long. People who studied with John can be found, I think many of us can be found in this room and throughout Canada and around the world. We're working as academics, government civil service, politicians, union employees, and running community organizations. Paul Moyse noted that John Loxley has populated the left in Manitoba, and he has directly and indirectly inspired much of the progressive policy work in the province, from his ideas on community economic development to his research on public-private partnerships and social impact bonds, which has been invaluable to unions like CUPE and others, and in my own research and committee hearing presentations, and I know that's the case for many individuals as well. John has worked at the highest level of government with premiers like Greg Salinger and abroad with the likes of Nelson Mandela. But he's not afraid to roll up his sleeves and help with the grunt work. He can also be found pounding the pavement to get out the vote on election day, working with Raina, or sorting out details with the Manitoba Research Grant application. And we've got a really strong team who puts those applications together for those multi-million-dollar grants, and we all work really well together. But it just wouldn't work, it wouldn't come together, and it wouldn't be possible without having John as our project director. Others have noted the way he can mix it up with government leaders and heads of banks one day or financial institutions, and then interact with regular folks the next, always with kindness and quiet respect. I think it's testimony to John's appeal that so many have come to this year's brunch. The diversity of people and groups here is also impressive. Members of John's beloved Crescentwood Saturday Soccer Club are here, and their presence brings out another aspect of John's life. And this is something that Sean and I have been talking about. His ability to create a network of groups and individuals that intersect in really interesting ways and which goes back decades. His soccer buddies share his progressive values and love of sport, as do members of his family. His political allies, many with the background in choices, continue doing advocacy work with him. His academic colleagues share his politics, some play soccer with him, and colleagues from other areas of work and community groups also play soccer and work on elections with him. John's international work, especially in Africa, connects him to the newcomer community, who of course love soccer and are keen to work on community issues with him. And at the end of the day, the game, the conference, the play, the election, the strike, John always has time to share a pint with friends. Sometimes two, every now and then three. John's family is of great importance to his life, and all are supportive of his many endeavors. In fact, family members have been known to collaborate on any number of projects, from research to co-publishing, to elections, and to, of course, soccer. Here today are his partner Aurelia, his children Salim, who came from Geneva, Raina and Matthew, and unfortunately Camille couldn't make it. Camille lives in Australia. Ziba is here, and members of Aurelia's extended family are here as well. John has never forgotten that the choices governments make have tremendous influence on people's lives, for better or for worse. And he's made it his life's work to push always for better. In doing so, he has inspired generations of progressive academic and labor and social activists, showing them how, as Jim Stanford said, to keep their eyes on the sky, but their feet on the ground. John, just before I ask you to come up and speak, I'd like to turn to an aspect of your work where you have had an important impact and which a lot of people may not know about, and that's your policy work around First Nations. John, I have greetings here from Cindy Blackstock, and Cindy is the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada, and I want to share her words with you. In 2004, First Nations child welfare leaders, the Assembly of First Nations, and the federal government charged the Caring Society with developing a new funding approach to end long-standing inequalities in First Nations child welfare. One day, our then board president, Elsie Flett, and I drafted up a dream team of researchers who we knew would give the very best of their talents and skills to the children. When it came to economists, there was only one name that would do, John Loxley. His knowledge of public service economics, partnered with his track record of working respectfully with First Nations, was unparalleled. We were so grateful when he said yes. He worked among a multidisciplinary team of Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers across 20 disciplines, and the resulting funding approach was documented in the 2005 One-Day reports. Now, while Canada did not implement the resulting funding approach, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal relied on it extensively in 2016, ordering Canada to remedy the discrimination. Since 2016, First Nations children and families have received billions of dollars in services that can be tracked back to John's contribution to One-Day. Cindy finishes off by saying that John is a man of great intellect, matched by a big heart and humble disposition. He is so truly deserving of this recognition, and I am delighted to have this opportunity to thank him for everything he has done and continues to do for First Nations kids. Congratulations, John, and P.S., we're not done yet, so don't put down your pencil. Cindy. I don't think there's much more to be said after that, John. I think Cindy speaks for all of us. So please come up and bask in the glory of our gratitude and admiration.
I was doing okay until Cindy's speech there. I'd like to thank the board and staff of the CCPA for bestowing this honor upon me. I'm humbled by this recognition, and to be on the same platform as my longtime friend Jim, and to listen to his wonderfully insightful presentation is a double honor. I must confess that I was worried that the room would clear after his presentation, so I'm somewhat relieved that to this point at least so many of you have stayed. The main purpose of the occasion is, of course, to promote the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues. Since its inception in 2012, the chair has been occupied by Lynn Fernandez. Lynn has succeeded in bringing to the task the progressive economic and political insights that Errol so admirably embodied. She has been prolific in shedding light on and debunking neoliberal theories and policies, and more important, in pointing out progressive alternatives. She has been a steady voice of reason on the left and has been able to reach out to a broad Manitoba audience through her publications in the press. Errol would be proud of you, Lynn, and of what you've made of the chair named in his honour. For you have succeeded commendably in combining first-rate analysis with proposals for policies and actions to improve the lives of Manitobans. Your work makes a difference, and in this you are following closely in the footsteps of Errol. We thank you for what you do and for all that you've done. It is to help continue your important work that today's fundraiser is being held. So I would ask all of you to bring your hands together for a show of appreciation for all that Lynn has accomplished. Thank you. It's perhaps understandable that on an occasion such as this, I would ask myself, how did I end up here? And what shaped my life that I would today be speaking to a who's who of the left in Manitoba. In reflecting on this, I think there have been three distinct, yet still overlapping periods of my personal formation, and I'd like to share these with you. The first is my childhood and early part of my life in Sheffield, UK, where I was born. I was one of 12 children, and my father was a steel worker who died of industrial lung disease. It's not supposed to happen. I was fortunate to have loving parents and siblings, but also I was the beneficiary of local and national governments that built a social safety net for working class families. It was the national government that brought in the 1944 Education Act that opened up secondary school education to working class children such as myself, and also, incidentally, provided free school milk. The national government also introduced the public health system in 1948 under the leadership of an Aaron Bevan, a former coal miner. The NHS operated under the principles of universality, free service at the point of delivery, equity, and central payment. It was a city council run essentially by workers who built public housing on a massive scale that ended waiting lists for people living in Victorian slums. It took over 20 years to address the housing backlog, but they did it. The City Council also built an extensive public library system that I relied upon heavily, there being no place to study at home. These strong supports from family, trade union activists, and progressive governments helped shape my view of the world from a very early age. They also made me deeply suspicious of neoliberalism and its emphasis on austerity, the effect of which, I believe, is to deny working class children the opportunities that I had. The second formative stage of my life was the more than a decade I spent in East Africa. I went there first as a PhD student, studying the colonial monetary system. That system channeled savings from Africa to colonial centres such as London. Every penny of currency in circulation had to be financed by an equivalent amount of money loaned to the British government in the form of securities. The rest of the colonial financial system, insurance companies, post office savings banks, and pension funds, all invested their funds in London. The system was, therefore, a gigantic vacuum cleaner, sucking up funds for investment in the mother country, helping maintain the poverty of the country which generated them. After decades of colonialism, there were virtually no African employees except at the very lowest levels. This helped form my views later on the colonial system to which Canadian Indigenous people were subjected. After teaching at the prestigious Makerere University in Uganda, where many well-known English political leaders throughout Africa were educated, for instance, Julius Nyerere, president of Tanzania, translated Shakespeare into Kiswahili there. I went to Tanzania to help them nationalize the commercial banking system and other parts of the economy, such as insurance and the large sisal industry. For a very young man, this was an amazing opportunity, but I was clear that it was made possible only because of colonialism's failure to train Africans. So in each of the jobs I had in Tanzania, I made it a point of finding or training an African successor. I left Tanzania after my boss in each of the places I worked, Amman Sekela, invited me to become a Tanzanian citizen. This clashed with my object of always being replaced by a Tanzanian, and I balked at being seen to be coming into the country in a privileged way. So ironically, my boss's desire to keep me in the country eventually drove me and my family away. It was a difficult decision to leave, as I was very happy there. My two older children, Salim and Camille, were born there, and their mother, Ziba, was an East African. As it happened, I made a number of Canadian friends in Dar es Salaam, and they persuaded me to join the Schreier government as Secretary to the Resource and Economic Development Committee of Cabinet, aptly named the Red Committee. When I came for interview, I was asked, "What is the population of Tasmania?" I thought I'd found myself in the midst of a general knowledge quiz. But we eventually sorted out that I was coming from Africa, not Australia. And that's how I ended up in Winnipeg in the company of progressives, the third formative stage of my life. For many years, I was able to retain ties with Africa. Two of my most satisfying experiences were helping Tanzania and other governments develop progressive alternatives to IMF austerity programs, and working with the ANC, COSATU, and Nelson Mandela on the transition to majority rule. I've never regretted my move here, and people often ask, well, why did you stay here when you could clearly have a choice of places to live? My answer is to be found by looking around this room, and I've lost my place. It's family and friends that have kept me here and have made my life fulfilling. I've been fortunate to live a rounded life academically, politically, and socially, and the people in this room reflect these facets of my life, that have helped shape who I am, warts and all. My government co-workers, union brothers and sisters, colleagues at the university, or my many students, past and present. Here, I'm not going to mention any names because I'm going to miss somebody else, so no names. My colleagues at the university, all my many students, past and present, members of the Anti-Apartheid Coalition, members of Choices and Pollock's Hardware Co-op, and many of you, like Jim Stanford, who were centrally involved in the alternative federal budget exercises, community economic development workers, my drinking buddies at the Yellow Dog Tavern, my North End friends, and throughout the years, members of the, as you've heard, Crescentwood Saturday Soccer Club. All have been vital parts of my existence and the reason why I've been so happy in Winnipeg. I should add that I worked closely for many years with former Premier Greg Sullinger, who I am naming, who was then active in Choices and the alternative federal budget exercises, and I'm pleased to see him here today. From my earliest days in Canada, I was drawn to the struggles of Indigenous people against their colonial oppression. I was fortunate enough to work with a number of prominent Indigenous leaders, some well before they became prominent, and learn much from them on issues of health, education, and economic development. More recently, as you heard, it's been my privilege to assist the indefatigable Cindy Blackstock, who works relentlessly to better the lives of Indigenous children and families. Decolonizing child welfare services in Canada, compensating children and families for years of neglect and neglectful government policies and underfunding, and reducing the outrageously high number of Indigenous children in care must surely be among the highest of political priorities in our time. I know from my own experience that loving families living in poor conditions need not be separated from their children if the right supports are in place. Fixing the child welfare system must be a paramount task in achieving reconciliation in Canada. That task is not helped by the grip of neoliberal governments across Canada and their attachment to austerity. We must struggle against this on many fronts. The continued attack on public sector workers in Manitoba is unwarranted, but very costly to both workers and to those they serve. We must work with the NDP, union and consumer groups to resist these cuts. The provincial governments aim to better align universities with the skilled labour needs of business is a serious threat to the arts and humanities, as Bob Canoe pointed out a couple of days ago, and must be resisted by UMFA with other union and wider public support. Many needs of people with disabilities remain unmet. Indeed, one of the first unannounced cuts that the Pallister government made in 2016 was to cancel a year-long exercise into an assured income program for people with prolonged and severe disabilities being conducted by the Premier's Advisory Council on Education, Poverty and Citizenship. Climate change adaptation is also a victim of in Canada of austerity and neoliberalism. There's no other political issue that brings together people of all ages, led by youth, as we saw in the Lear Gazan campaign. We must build that movement both within and outside the electoral framework with some urgency, as we are running out of time. And as we saw in the provincial election, cuts to healthcare and education at school levels remain a very real threat about which the public is aware. There is much work to be done here with nurses, other healthcare workers, and with teachers. Uzoma Azagwara's statement last week linking increased wait times to bed closures and nurse shortages was very helpful in that regard. One can see that they are fitting very nicely into the new health portfolio. We've seen in recent reports how far there is to go to achieve women's full equality, and there is continuing pressure on preserving past hard-fought gains in the area of choice. Expanding and fully accepting the rights of the LGBTQ2S community is an ongoing battle. Racism and anti-immigration remain and are growing in some parts of Canada. The related struggles against poverty and homelessness seem to be relentless. Strong political representation at all levels is vital if we are to make progress in these areas. We need also to build strong political alliances between parties, unions, and community activist organizations based on solid information and research to combat these growing problems. The Choices experience provides some guidelines here, and it also pointed to an operating style that kept up the enthusiasm of activists, drawing on humor, street theatre, and bringing out glaring inconsistencies in the position of neoliberal purveyors of austerity to promote progressive causes. One of the best examples I would draw on here is that one of our members in Choices, dressed as a London bobby, presenting the private sponsors of the former Jets, the old Jets, who were appearing before the City Council to ask for huge subsidies. That's during the time of cuts. And so they were appearing before the City Council asking for subsidies. And our member, dressed as a London bobby, appeared before them and gave the private sector man who was asking for subsidies a summons. And the summons was written on City of Winnipeg police notepaper, don't ask me how, and accused them of panhandling in public. And that was a reference to an anti-poor legislation that was brought in about that time. So that made a clear point about political choices. It was funny and ultimately received a lot of publicity because detractors sought to avoid the political issue by raising questions about the use of police notepaper. So that carried on the thing for another 2 or 3 days in the press. There is therefore much for the Errol Black Chair to tackle in assisting unions and NGOs involved in these very large political struggles that I've mentioned. And in this, the CCPA generally will have an important role. CCPA has been very important to me for years. We run the Manitoba Research Alliance, as you heard, shared partnership grant through the CCPA, and I've been privileged to work with 3 committed executive directors. Lynn has also been a key player in that relationship and is only now, this week, taking a breather from having helped us put together another grant application over the past many months. My colleagues at the MRA have also been an important part of my life for the past 17 years. I've got a large and loving family here. Salim and Camille have been joined by Raina and Matthew and their mum, Aurelia, my wife, and her family, the Mogans and Sharmas, whose support and friendship is very dear to me. So the third phase of my existence has been and continues to be one filled with interesting and challenging work alongside a myriad of firm friends and colleagues. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for coming to support the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues and the CCPA, and Jim for his, as usual, excellent and insightful presentation. Thanks also to my friends at the fore, Gary, Rick, and Ida, for once again being such splendid hosts. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I promise I'm the very last one. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt McLean, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the CCPA Manitoba Steering Committee here in our fine province. This is our 9th EBC fundraising brunch, and I think it would be safe to say that Errol Black would be very proud to see so many people here today and to see us honoring John Loxley. You know, we've had a lot of great honorees over the years, and none greater than John. So thank you, John, for all the work that you've done here in Manitoba for the CCPA. I can't really add much more that hasn't been said, but I do want to acknowledge that without your work, CCPA Manitoba would be a shell of what it is. The work that you do and the research that you bring in have really made CCPA Manitoba into the organization it is today, and we need to thank you for that. I also, of course, need to thank Jim Stanford for agreeing to travel from Australia in November to Manitoba in a cold, blistery November, and to acknowledge, of course, all the work you've done. And I think, of course, the fact that Jim agreed to be here really, again, is another testament to just how important John is, not just here, but the world over. And of course, need to thank the staff of CCPA, Molly, Lynn, Karen. A lot of work goes into making this possible. And it was already mentioned before, but I want to stress it again. This is our largest brunch ever. We sold 370 tickets, which is 50 more than we've ever done previously. And we are on the verge of being too big for this hall, which is a terrible, terrible problem to have if you're a fundraiser. So thank you for all the work that you do. And finally, of course, we need to thank the staff and everyone here at the Fort Garry. This is our 9th fundraiser. Each of them have been here at the Fort Garry, and they always do such a wonderful job as guests. I want to give special recognition to the owners, Richard and Ida, who you may have heard are trying to transition to a different stage of their life, and the hotel is up for sale. So if anyone's in the market, they might be willing to talk. But I just wanted to give special thanks to them. They have been great partners of ours over the years. And what may not be known is that they were critical in helping EBC get off the ground in the first place. The first EBC fundraising social was held here at the Fort Garry, and they did not charge CCPA a dime for that event, and really allowed us to put a bunch of money aside that's helped sustain the chair over the years. So we owe great thanks to them, and of course wish them the best in their future endeavors. And in the spirit of that generosity, not that I expect anyone here to provide a brunch for 400 people, there is on everyone's table a donation form. If you are in the position to do so, I would encourage you to fill that out and become a regular contributor to CCPA Manitoba. And as a reminder for those of you who are aware, or to let you know for those who aren't, if you are a regular contributor to CCP Manitoba, you get mailed to you a copy of the Monitor, which is on everyone's tables. The last edition was the special general strike, 1919 general strike, and a lot of great research is produced in there. And if you're a regular donor, it comes to your house. You don't even have to do anything, just shows up. We will have volunteers standing at the doors. I have been told they have baskets, and they do. Volunteer, see over there's 2 of them. So if you're able, I would highly encourage you to fill it out and drop it off as you leave. Or if you'd like to talk to anyone at CCPA about making donations, you can talk to myself, Molly, Lynn, Karen, anyone from CCPA would be more than willing to talk to you about how we can help take the money out of your wallet. And with that said, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.